Blood soaked through the calico fabric of her dress as Juliana Dawson pressed her hand against the gunshot wound in her side, watching her vision blur while the desert sun burned overhead like a merciless judge. The stagecoach robbery had happened so fast. One moment she had been traveling from Santa Fe to visit her sister in Amarillo. The next bandits had surrounded them on the lonely stretch of trail between towns. The driver had tried to outrun them, but the wheels caught a rut, and the whole coach went sideways. Juliana remembered flying through the air, remembered the crack of gunfire, remembered the screams. Then nothing but heat and pain, and the slow realization that she was alone, abandoned by the bandits who had taken everything of value and left her for dead in the scrubland 20 miles outside of Glenrio, New Mexico. She did not know how long she had been lying there. Hours, maybe. The sun had moved across the sky, and thirst had become as much an enemy as the wound that leaked her life into the dusty earth. Her lips were cracked, her throat raw. She tried to call out once more, but only a whisper emerged. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Hope flared in her chest, painful and desperate. She tried to lift her head, but the world spun. The hoofbeats grew closer, then stopped. She waited for voices, for rescue, but none came. Just the sound of a horse breathing, snorting, and then the distinct feeling of being watched. Juliana forced her eyes open. A magnificent bay horse stood 15 feet away, its reins trailing in the dirt, its saddle empty. The animal was watching her with intelligent dark eyes, its ears pricked forward. It took a few cautious steps closer, lowered its head, and nickered softly. "Please," Juliana whispered, "help me." The horse tossed its head and began to pace in a tight circle around her, never taking its eyes off her prone form. It pawed at the ground, creating small clouds of dust, then threw back its head and let out a piercing whinny that echoed across the empty landscape. Juliana's vision was darkening at the edges. She wondered if this was how she would die, watching a riderless horse call into the void. At least it was something living, something that acknowledged her existence in these final moments. The horse whinnied again, louder this time, more insistent. Lucas Anderson heard his horse before he saw it. He had been tracking the bay for the better part of an hour after it had spooked and bolted when they encountered a rattlesnake near the creek. The horse was his most valued possession, a gift from his late father, and Lucas would be damned if he let the animal wander off into territory where rustlers and wild animals could claim it. But something was wrong. That was not the sound of a horse calmly grazing. That was distress. Lucas spurred his temporary mount, a borrowed mare from the Glenrio livery, into a faster trot. He crested a small rise and saw his bay standing in a clearing, pacing and calling. The horse saw him and whinnied louder, more urgently, as if to say, "Finally, you fool, get over here." "What is it, Copper?" Lucas called, urging the mare forward. "What has got you so worked up?" Then he saw her. A woman lay crumpled on the ground, her blue dress stained dark with blood, her face pale as bleached bone. Lucas was off the borrowed mare in an instant, his heart hammering. Copper stepped aside as he approached but did not leave, staying close and watchful. Lucas knelt beside the woman and pressed his fingers to her throat. A pulse, faint but present. "Thank God." "Madam," he said, his voice rough with concern. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. Up close he could see she was young, probably around his own age of 24. Dark hair spilled across the dirt, and even pale and injured, she was beautiful. But that did not matter now. What mattered was the wound in her side and the fact that she was losing blood. Lucas tore strips from his own shirt, working quickly to create a makeshift bandage. The wound looked like a gunshot, clean through the flesh of her side. Painful and dangerous, but if he could stop the bleeding and get her to a doctor, she might live. "Stay with me," he murmured as he worked. "You are going to be fine, I have got you now." Her eyes opened fully, confused and glassy with pain. "The horse," she whispered. "That is Copper," Lucas said, tying off the bandage as gently as he could. "He found you. Good thing he is as stubborn as a mule and would not stop calling. I would have ridden right past this spot otherwise." A ghost of a smile touched her cracked lips. "Smart horse." "The smartest," Lucas agreed. He looked around, taking stock of the situation. The wrecked stagecoach was visible about 30 yards away, tipped on its side. No sign of other survivors. No sign of the bandits either, but he was not about to wait around to see if they came back. "I am going to lift you now," he said. "It is going to hurt." She nodded, bracing herself. Lucas slid his arms beneath her as carefully as he could, but she still gasped when he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, or perhaps it was just the adrenaline making him strong. Copper stood steady as Lucas approached, as if the horse understood the situation required calm. Getting Juliana onto the horse while she was barely conscious proved challenging, but Lucas managed to settle her in the saddle, then swung up behind her. He wrapped one arm around her waist, holding her secure against his chest, and took up the reins with his other hand. "Let us go home, boy," he said to Copper, and the bay turned without hesitation, heading back toward Glenrio at a steady canter that ate up the miles without jarring too badly. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride. Lucas kept up a steady stream of talk, partly to keep her awake and partly to keep himself calm. "Name is Lucas Anderson," he said. "I work a small ranch about 5 miles outside of Glenrio. Been there since my father passed 2 years ago. Nothing fancy, but it is mine. What is your name?" "Juliana," she breathed. "Juliana Dawson." "Well, Miss Dawson, you picked a hell of a place to get shot. Lucky for you, Copper here has better sense than most people I know. Been with me since I was 17. My father bought him for me from a horse trader passing through. Said a man needs a good horse more than he needs a good gun in this territory." "He was right," Juliana murmured. "You just keep talking to me, all right. Tell me where you are from." "Santa Fe, was visiting. Stagecoach to Amarillo, then the bandits came." Lucas felt her body tense at the memory. "Do not think about that now. Think about something good. You have family in Amarillo, sister, Margaret. She is married to a teacher there. I was supposed to help her. She just had a baby. Well, we will get you patched up and you will make it to see that baby. Doc Morrison in Glenrio is a good man. Served as a surgeon in the war. If anyone can fix you up, he can." The town of Glenrio appeared on the horizon, small and dusty but beautiful to Lucas in that moment. He rode straight down the main street to the doctor's office, ignoring the stares of the townspeople. Copper seemed to sense the urgency and picked up his pace. Doc Morrison was a grizzled man in his 50s with steady hands and kind eyes. He took one look at Juliana and immediately cleared his examination table. "Gunshot wound," Lucas said as he carried her inside. "Found her out past the Old Creek Road. Stagecoach robbery," she said. The doctor was already cutting away the makeshift bandage. "You did good work stopping the bleeding. Probably saved her life. Now get out and let me work." Lucas hesitated. He did not want to leave her, which was strange given he had only known this woman for an hour. But something about the way she had looked at him, the trust in her eyes when he had promised to help her, made him feel responsible. "Out," Doc Morrison repeated, but not unkindly. "You can wait in the outer room. This will take a while." Lucas found himself pacing the small waiting area like a caged animal. Through the window he could see Copper tied to the hitching post, the horse's head hanging low with exhaustion. The borrowed mare stood beside him, equally tired. Lucas needed to return the mare to the livery, needed to check on his ranch, needed to do 100 things. But he could not make himself leave. The surgery took 2 hours. When Doc Morrison finally emerged, wiping his hands on a blood-stained towel, Lucas was on his feet in an instant. "She is going to live," the doctor said, and Lucas felt something unclench in his chest. "The bullet went clean through, missed anything vital. She lost a lot of blood and she is weak as a kitten, but with rest and proper care she should make a full recovery." "Can I see her?" Doc Morrison raised an eyebrow. "She a friend of yours?" "No, I just found her, but I would like to know she is all right." The doctor studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "She is sleeping now, but you can look in. She's going to need a place to stay while she recovers." "Cannot keep her here more than a few days." Lucas had not thought that far ahead, but the answer came easily. "She can stay at my place. I have got room." "You sure about that? Young, unmarried woman staying at a bachelor's ranch. People will talk." "Let them talk." "She needs help and I am offering it." Doc Morrison smiled slightly. "Your father would be proud of you, son. He was always one to help folks in need too." Lucas was allowed into the back room where Juliana lay on a narrow bed, her face still pale but peaceful in sleep. Someone, probably the doctor's wife, had cleaned the dirt from her face and braided her long dark hair. She looked younger now, vulnerable. He stood there for a few minutes, just watching her breathe, reassuring himself that she was truly alive. Then he quietly left to make arrangements. The next 3 days passed in a blur. Lucas returned the borrowed mare with his thanks and a few coins, then rode Copper back to his ranch to prepare for a guest. The place was not much, just a small house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a main room. It had been built by his parents when they first claimed the land, and Lucas had done his best to maintain it after they passed. But it was a bachelor's home, functional rather than comfortable. He cleaned the spare bedroom, which had been serving as storage, and made up the bed with the good quilts his mother had sewn. He stocked the kitchen with supplies from town and made sure the pump was working properly. By the time he returned to Glenrio to check on Juliana, he was exhausted but satisfied that he could provide decent care for her. Doc Morrison declared her well enough to be moved, though she would need weeks of rest before she was fully healed. Lucas borrowed a wagon from the livery for the journey, padding the bed with blankets to make it as comfortable as possible. Juliana was awake when he arrived to collect her. She was sitting up in bed, wearing a borrowed dress from the doctor's wife, her color much improved though she still looked fragile. "Mr. Anderson," she said when he entered. Her voice was stronger now, clear and melodious. "Dr. Morrison tells me you have offered me a place to stay during my recovery. That is incredibly generous, but I cannot possibly impose on you that way." Lucas removed his hat, suddenly feeling awkward. In the chaos of the rescue and surgery, he had not really talked to her as a person. Now, with her looking at him with those intelligent green eyes, he found himself tongue-tied. "It is no imposition, Miss Dawson," he finally said. "You need a place to heal, and I have got room. Besides, Copper would never forgive me if I let something happen to you now after he went to all that trouble to find you." That earned him a smile, a real one this time. "How can I argue with the wishes of such a noble horse?" "You cannot," Lucas said, relaxing a little. "The wagon is ready whenever you are." The journey to the ranch was slow and careful. Lucas drove the wagon while Copper followed behind, tied to the back. Juliana lay in the padded bed, watching the landscape roll by. "It is beautiful here," she said at one point. "Harsh, but beautiful." "It grows on you," Lucas replied. "When my parents first came out here in '58, my mother cried for a week, said she would never get used to so much empty space. But after a while, she said she could not imagine living anywhere else, said the land had a way of getting into your blood." "How long have they been gone?" "Ma died of fever 6 years ago, Pa followed 2 years back, heart attack while he was mending fence. I found him out in the east pasture. The memory still hurt, but Lucas had learned to live with it. This ranch was their dream. I am doing my best to keep it going for them. I am sure they would be proud of you, Juliana said softly. The ranch house came into view, modest but well-maintained. Lucas helped Juliana down from the wagon, and she leaned heavily on him as they made their way inside. He could feel how weak she still was, how much the short journey had cost her. He settled her in the spare bedroom, making sure she had everything she needed within reach. Water, a bell to ring if she needed help, extra blankets. I will be right in the next room if you need anything, he said. Do not try to get up on your own, you are still healing. Thank you, Juliana said, and there was something in her voice that made Lucas pause. I mean it. You saved my life. I do not know how I will ever repay you. No repayment needed, Lucas said. Just get better. The days that followed fell into a comfortable routine. Lucas would wake early to tend to the ranch, caring for the small herd of cattle and the handful of horses he was training to sell. Then he would return to make breakfast, checking on Juliana and helping her as needed. At first she could barely sit up on her own, but gradually her strength returned. They talked during those long days. Lucas learned that Juliana was 22, that she had grown up in Santa Fe where her father owned a mercantile. She had been planning to help her sister with the new baby and had hoped to find work as a teacher in Amarillo. She loved reading, could speak a little Spanish, and had a quick wit that showed more as she recovered. Lucas found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the sound of her laughter when he told stories about Copper's various misadventures. She was easy to talk to, interested in everything about the ranch and his life. She did not look down on him for being a simple rancher, the way some of the more refined women in town did. On the 5th day of her stay, Juliana was well enough to sit in the main room for a few hours. Lucas helped her to the rocking chair near the window, where she could look out at the land. I should write to my sister, she said. She must be worried sick. I never arrived in Amarillo. I can take a letter into town tomorrow, Lucas offered. Send it on the next stage. He brought her paper and a pen, and she composed a careful letter explaining what had happened and assuring her sister that she was safe and recovering. Lucas tried not to hover, but he found himself watching her, fascinated by the graceful way she moved despite her injury, the thoughtful expression on her face as she chose her words. When she finished, she looked up and caught him staring. A faint blush colored her cheeks. I must look a fright, she said, touching her hair self-consciously. You look fine, Lucas said, and meant it. She looked more than fine. She looked like she belonged there in his home, in his life. The thought startled him. As the second week passed, Juliana grew stronger. She could move around the house on her own, though Lucas still worried and tried to help more than she probably needed. She insisted on helping with small tasks, folding laundry or preparing vegetables for dinner, claiming that sitting idle would drive her mad. I am not used to being helpless, she admitted one evening as they prepared dinner together. At home I was always working in the store or helping my mother with the house. This enforced rest is harder than the injury. You were shot, Lucas reminded her. You are allowed to rest. I know, but I feel useless. You have been so kind, and all I do is take up space and eat your food. Lucas put down the knife he had been using to chop vegetables and turned to face her. You are not taking up space, and I like having you here. The words hung in the air between them. Juliana's eyes widened slightly, and Lucas realized what he had just admitted. His ears burned with embarrassment. I mean, it is nice having company, he amended quickly. Gets lonely out here sometimes, just me and the horses. I like being here too, Juliana said softly. You have been kinder to me than I had any right to expect." Their eyes met and held. Lucas felt something shift between them, something warm and tentative and full of possibility. Then Copper whinnied from the corral, breaking the moment, and they both returned to their tasks with a hint of awkwardness. That night, Lucas lay in his bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. He was falling for her. It was foolish and impractical and probably hopeless. She was educated, refined, from a good family. He was a simple rancher with calloused hands and few prospects. Once she was healed, she would go to Amarillo to be with her sister, and he would likely never see her again. But knowing all that did not stop his heart from racing when she smiled at him, or the way his day felt brighter when she was near in her own room. Juliana was having similar thoughts. She had never met anyone like Lucas Anderson. The men she had known in Santa Fe had been merchants or clerks, soft-handed and calculating. Lucas was different. He was strong but gentle, capable but humble. The way he cared for his animals, for his land, for her, spoke to a goodness that went bone deep. She thought about how he had trusted his horse, how Copper had refused to leave her. The bond between man and animal was something special, something she had never witnessed before. And now she was caught up in it, drawn into their world. The thought of leaving, of going to Amarillo as she had planned, filled her with unexpected sadness. But what choice did she have? She could not simply impose on Lucas forever, no matter how much she was coming to care for him. By the third week, Juliana was well enough to venture outside. Lucas took her on short walks around the property, showing her the garden his mother had planted, the corral where he worked with the horses, the creek that ran along the northern boundary. Copper followed them everywhere, never far from Juliana's side. The horse had formed an obvious attachment to her, nickering softly whenever she appeared and allowing her to stroke his neck. "He knows you saved my life," Juliana said, feeding Copper an apple from the small orchard behind the house. "He is making sure you take good care of me." "I think he is the one taking care of you," Lucas said with a smile. "I am just following his orders." They were standing by the corral fence, the afternoon sun warm on their faces. Juliana turned to look at Lucas, her expression serious. "Can I ask you something? Anything?" "Why did you take me in? You did not know me. You had no obligation to help me beyond getting me to the doctor. Why open your home to a stranger?" Lucas considered the question. He could give her the easy answer, the polite one about Christian duty and common decency. But she deserved the truth. "When I saw you lying there," he said slowly, "when I thought you might die, something in me just refused to accept it. And then when you woke up, when you smiled at me even though you were in pain, I knew I had to help you. I cannot really explain it better than that." "And now?" Juliana asked softly. "Do you regret it?" "Never," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Having you here has been, well, it has been the best 3 weeks I have had in a long time." Juliana reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were small and delicate in his work-roughened palm. "I am glad I am here too. Even though the circumstances were terrible, I cannot bring myself to regret where I ended up." Lucas looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face. She was so close he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could count the freckles across her nose that the sun had brought out during her recovery. "Juliana," he said, and then stopped, unsure how to continue. "Yes. I know you are planning to go to Amarillo when you are healed. I know you have your sister there and your whole life planned out. But I need you to know that if you ever wanted to stay here, if you ever thought you could be happy on a small ranch in the middle of nowhere with just me and Copper for company, I would count myself the luckiest man alive." Juliana's eyes filled with tears. "Lucas, you do not have to answer now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, Before you leave, I wanted you to know how I feel." She stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, a feather-light touch that sent electricity through him. "I will think about it," she whispered. "I promise." That night at dinner, they were both quiet, lost in their own thoughts. The easy companionship of the past weeks had shifted into something more charged, more uncertain. Lucas kept catching Juliana watching him, and when their eyes met, she would not look away. After dinner, as Lucas washed the dishes and Juliana dried, she finally spoke. "My sister's letter arrived today while you were out with the cattle." Lucas's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What did she say?" "She is relieved I am alive and recovering. She wants me to come to Amarillo as soon as I am able." Juliana set down the dish she had been drying. "She also mentioned that her husband has found me a position at the school there, teaching young children." "It is what I always wanted." "That is wonderful," Lucas said and tried to mean it. "You will be a wonderful teacher." "It is what I thought I wanted," Juliana corrected softly. "Before the robbery, before I woke up and saw your face, before I came to love this place and the life here." Lucas turned to face her fully, his heart hammering. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I do not want to go to Amarillo. I am saying that I have fallen in love with you, Lucas Anderson, and I cannot imagine leaving." For a moment, Lucas could only stare at her, wondering if he had heard correctly. Then he was crossing the small kitchen in 2 strides, taking her face in his hands, mindful of her healing injury as he kissed her. It was a kiss full of relief and joy and promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "I love you too," Lucas said. "God help me, I have loved you since the moment you woke up in my arms and smiled at me like I had hung the moon." Juliana laughed, a sound of pure happiness. "Then I am staying." "If you will have me, I am staying." "If I will have you." Lucas laughed too, then kissed her again. "Juliana Dawson, I would be honored if you would stay, if you would marry me and make this place a home instead of just a house." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Anderson?" "It is." "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but when you know something is right, you just know. So, Juliana, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said and kissed him again. "Yes, absolutely yes." They stood in the kitchen, holding each other as the evening light faded through the windows. Outside, Copper whinnied as if in approval, and they both laughed. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Lucas rode into Glenrio to speak with the preacher, and to send a letter to Juliana's family in Santa Fe, asking for their blessing. Juliana wrote to her sister, explaining her decision and inviting her to the wedding if she could make the journey. The townspeople of Glenrio were surprised but supportive. Doc Morrison pronounced it the best outcome of any case he had ever treated. The livery owner who had lent Lucas the mare insisted on giving them a milk cow as a wedding present. Even the stern-faced widow who ran the boarding house softened enough to offer to make the wedding cake. Juliana's father arrived 2 weeks before the wedding, riding out to the ranch with a wagon load of goods from his mercantile as a dowry. He was a stern-looking man with the same green eyes as his daughter, and Lucas was nervous as he approached. "Mr. Dawson," he said, extending his hand. "I am Lucas Anderson. I want you to know I will take good care of your daughter." Thomas Dawson studied him for a long moment, then shook his hand firmly. "My daughter tells me you saved her life, that your horse found her when no one else would have. She says you are a good man, and Juliana is an excellent judge of character." "I love her, sir," Lucas said simply. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is happy." "That is all a father can ask," Thomas said, and smiled. "Now show me this ranch that has stolen my daughter's heart." The wedding took place on a Sunday morning in October of 1883 in the small church in Glenrio. The building was packed with townspeople. many of whom Lucas barely knew but who had come to witness the marriage of the cowboy, and the woman his horse had saved. Juliana wore a dress her mother had sewn, white with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Lucas wore his best suit, the one he had worn to his father's funeral, but this was a much happier occasion. As Juliana walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion. She was beautiful, radiant, and she was choosing him, choosing this life. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, Copper, tied outside, let out a loud whinny that had everyone laughing. And when Lucas kissed his bride, the whole church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food provided by what seemed like half the town. There was music and dancing and toasts to the happy couple. Juliana's sister Margaret had made the journey after all, bringing her husband and the baby Juliana had originally been traveling to see. "I am glad you found happiness," Margaret said, holding her sister tight. "When we got the news about the robbery, I thought I had lost you. This is so much better than anything I could have hoped for." As the sun set and the guests began to depart, Lucas and Juliana stood together watching the last rays of light paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Copper grazed nearby, content. "Happy?" Lucas asked, his arm around his wife's waist. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Juliana said. "Who would have thought that getting shot would lead to this? I am not sure that is how we should tell the story to our future children," Lucas said with a laugh. "No, I suppose not. We will tell them about the brave horse who refused to leave a wounded woman, about the cowboy who trusted his animal and found her alive, about how sometimes the worst things can lead to the best things." "I like that version better," Lucas agreed. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. The ranch required constant work, and there were times when money was tight, but they faced everything together. Juliana proved to be remarkably capable, learning to care for the animals, to cook on the wood stove, to mend fences when needed. She also started a small school in their home, teaching the children of nearby ranchers a few days a week, fulfilling her dream of being a teacher in her own way. Lucas continued to train and sell horses, building a reputation for quality animals. Copper remained a fixture of ranch life, though he was getting older. The bay horse still followed Juliana everywhere, and she spoiled him with treats and affection. In the spring of 1884, Juliana discovered she was pregnant. Lucas was overjoyed, building a cradle from oak wood and placing it in the corner of their bedroom. Juliana continued to teach until she was too far along, then spent her last months preparing for the baby. Their son was born on a cold December morning, healthy and loud. They named him Thomas Lucas Anderson, after both grandfathers. Lucas held the tiny bundle with shaking hands, awed by the perfection of this new life. "He is beautiful," he whispered. "He has your eyes," Juliana said, exhausted but happy. Copper was fascinated by the baby, always gentle when the child was brought near. As Thomas grew, he showed the same love for animals that his father had, toddling after Copper and giggling when the horse would lower his head to nuzzle the boy. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family. They named her Rose Caroline, and she had her mother's dark hair and green eyes. The little house that had once seemed too big for just Lucas now rang with the sounds of children and laughter. Life was not always easy. There were droughts that tested their resources, winters that were harsh and long, but the family weathered everything together. Lucas and Juliana's love only deepened with time, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared struggles. On their 5th anniversary, Lucas gave Juliana a locket with a tiny photograph of Copper inside. "For the horse who brought us together," he said as he fastened it around her neck. Juliana touched the locket, tears in her eyes. "I love it. I love you." They stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Rose how to approach a horse properly, mimicking the patient lessons Lucas had taught him. The ranch had grown over the years, with more cattle and horses, a bigger barn, and even a small bunkhouse for the two hands Lucas had hired. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked. "Giving up the life you might have had in Amarillo, the teaching position, the town life?" Juliana turned to him, her expression fierce. "Never, not for one single moment. This is where I belong. With you, with our children, with this land. I would not trade it for anything." Copper, now showing his age with some gray around his muzzle, stood in the corral watching over the family. He had lived longer than most horses, and Lucas knew their time with him was limited. But for now, the old bay was still there, still a part of their lives. In 1888, when Thomas was 4 and Rose was 2, Juliana became pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the first two, and Lucas worried constantly. But in the early summer, she gave birth to healthy twin boys. They named them James and Daniel, and suddenly the house was even more full of noise and chaos and love. Copper passed away peacefully the following winter, on a morning when fresh snow covered the ground. Lucas found him in his favorite spot in the corral, looking for all the world like he had simply laid down to rest. He was 23 years old, ancient for a horse. Lucas and Juliana buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple marker Lucas carved from stone. The children placed wildflowers on the grave, even though they were too young to fully understand. "He was a good horse," Lucas said, his voice thick. "The best I ever knew. He brought me you, and that is a debt I can never repay." Juliana leaned against him, both of them crying. He knew he was loved. That is all any of us can ask for. Life continued. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Lucas and Juliana's love remained constant. They added another bedroom to the house to accommodate the growing family. Juliana's school expanded, and eventually they built a proper schoolhouse on a corner of their property, where she taught not just their own children but those of their neighbors. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with horses like his father. By the time he was 14, he was training yearlings alongside Lucas, and they made a good team. Rose was more interested in books and learning, often helping her mother at the school. The twins were terrors, always getting into mischief, but they were loving boys with good hearts. On their 10th anniversary, Lucas and Juliana took a rare trip into Glenrio for dinner at the hotel restaurant. It was a luxury they seldom allowed themselves, but Mrs. Henderson from the neighboring ranch had offered to watch the children for the evening. Sitting across from each other at the candlelit table, Lucas reached for Juliana's hand. 10 years, he said. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that I found you in the desert. Other times it feels like you have always been with me. I know what you mean, Juliana said. I cannot remember what my life was like before you, before this. She gestured to encompass not just the restaurant but everything, the ranch, the children, the life they had built. Do you think if the robbery had never happened, if you had made it to Amarillo safely, we would have still found each other somehow? Lucas asked. Juliana considered this. I like to think so. I like to think that we were meant to be together and the universe would have found a way. But I am grateful it happened the way it did, as terrible as it was. Because it brought me Copper and Copper brought me you. To Copper, Lucas said, raising his glass. To Copper, Juliana echoed, and they drank to the memory of the horse who had changed both their lives. As the years passed, the ranch became one of the most successful in the region. Lucas's horses were sought after throughout New Mexico and into Texas. Juliana's school gained a reputation for excellence, and former students would sometimes return years later to thank her for the education that had changed their lives. Thomas married at 22, bringing a bride named Sarah to the ranch. They built a house on the eastern section of the property, and soon enough, Lucas and Juliana were grandparents. Rose went to teachers' college in Santa Fe but returned to take over her mother's school, allowing Juliana to finally rest after 20 years of teaching. The twins both decided to try their fortunes in California, though they wrote often and visited when they could. In 1903, on a warm spring evening, Lucas and Juliana sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset. They were both in their 40s now, their hair showing touches of gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. "You remember when this porch was just you, me, and Copper?" Juliana asked. "I do," Lucas said. "Now look at us. Children, grandchildren, a thriving ranch, your school. We have built something real here." "We have built a legacy," Juliana agreed. "And it all started because a horse was too stubborn to leave a dying woman behind." Lucas laughed. "Copper always did have a mind of his own. I am just glad he decided to make such a fuss that day. Best decision he ever made for me." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands as they had done countless times over the years. Their love had evolved from that first desperate, passionate connection into something deeper and more enduring. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a look, had weathered storms both literal and figurative together. "I love you, Juliana Anderson," Lucas said. "Just as much today as the day I married you, more even." "I love you too," Juliana said. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for giving me this beautiful life." As the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, they remained on the porch, two people who had been brought together by chance and horse sense, who had built a love that would endure for all their days. Years continued to pass in a gentle rhythm. The ranch saw new generations born and old friends laid to rest. Lucas and Juliana grew old together, their bodies slowing but their minds and hearts as sharp as ever. They took joy in watching their grandchildren grow, in seeing Thomas take over more of the ranch work, in hearing about the twins' adventures in California. In 1915, 32 years after that fateful day in the desert, Lucas fell ill with pneumonia. Despite Doc Morrison's best efforts, the old doctor was now in his 80s himself, but still practicing. Lucas grew weaker. Juliana never left his side, sitting by his bed and holding his hand as he had once held hers when she was the one fighting for life. "I am not ready to leave you," Lucas whispered one night when the fever was particularly bad. "Then do not leave," Juliana said fiercely. "Fight this, Lucas. Fight for me, for our family." And he did fight with the same determination that had helped him build their life together. Slowly, painfully, he recovered. By spring he was back on his feet, though he moved slower and tired more easily. But he was alive, and that was what mattered. They celebrated their 35th anniversary surrounded by family. Thomas and Sarah's children, now with children of their own, filled the expanded ranch house with noise and joy. Rose and her husband, along with their 3 daughters, had traveled from Santa Fe. Even the twins had made the journey from California, bringing their own families. Standing at the head of the long table, Lucas raised his glass. 35 years ago, I married the most beautiful, intelligent, and stubborn woman I have ever known. She has given me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She has made our house a home and our land a legacy. Juliana, you are my heart, and I thank God every day that Copper was too stubborn to leave you behind." Everyone laughed and raised their glasses. Juliana stood and kissed her husband, not caring that the whole family was watching. "And I thank God for a cowboy who trusted his horse," she said, who saw a wounded stranger and chose to save her, who opened his home and his heart and gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. The celebration lasted long into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. The grandchildren begged for the story of how their grandparents met, and Lucas and Juliana told it together, finishing each other's sentences as they had learned to do over the decades. In 1920, at the age of 61, Lucas passed away peacefully in his sleep. He had spent the day working with the horses he loved, teaching his great-grandson how to gentle a spirited mare. He had eaten dinner with Juliana, talking about plans for expanding the orchard. And then he had gone to bed and simply not woken up. Juliana was devastated but not broken. She had known this day would come eventually, though she had hoped for more time. They buried Lucas on the hill next to Copper, with a marker that read, Lucas Anderson, beloved husband, father, and friend. He trusted his horse and found his heart. Juliana lived another 8 years, spending her time with her family and maintaining the school that had become her life's work. She never remarried, saying that she had already had the love of her life, and one was enough for any person. On a summer evening in 1928, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Juliana closed her eyes for the last time. She was 67 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Her last words were, "Tell Lucas I am coming," and then she was gone. They buried her next to her husband, with a marker that read, Juliana Anderson, beloved wife, mother, and teacher. She was found alive and lived fully. The ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own touches while respecting the foundation that Lucas and Juliana had built. The schoolhouse became a historic landmark. Stories of the couple who had been brought together by a loyal horse became part of local legend, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But those who had known them, who had seen the way Lucas looked at Juliana even after 37 years of marriage, who had witnessed the strength of their partnership and the depth of their love, knew that no embellishment was necessary. The truth was remarkable enough. A cowboy had trusted his horse. His horse had refused to leave a wounded woman. And from that moment of trust and loyalty had sprung a love story that would endure long after both of them were gone. A testament to the power of compassion, the wisdom of animals, and the incredible things that can happen when two people choose each other against all odds. The land they had worked together, the children they had raised, the lives they had touched, all of it stood as a monument to what they had built. And on that hill overlooking the ranch, 3 markers stood in a row: a horse who had been wise, a man who had been kind, and a woman who had been brave. Together, even in death, as they had been in life.